Intel is our sponsor for this episode of the new Stack Analysts. In this show, we bring you Pancake Robot in our Pancake Breakfast podcast panel from OpenStack Silicon Valley. The topic, what is your OpenStack? Kubernetes? Intel is making deep investments in the software-defined infrastructure world with projects in telemetry, orchestration, and even artificial intelligence. Learn more at intel.com. Hey everyone, welcome to the Pancake Breakfast here at OpenStack. Thank you for joining us. We've been doing these Pancake Breakfasts, and this one in particular we're excited to be at because we go to a lot of OpenStack events, and Intel has been our sponsor for these events, and we just want to thank them very much for making this possible. I hope you've had a chance to see Pancake Robot over here. This is our Pancake Overlord, and basically, the way we think of the Pancake Bot is like our companion now for these breakfasts. But also, what I find interesting right now is because we're living in this world of data, and we talk about the Internet of Things, but you know how many people it takes to actually get this thing going? Robots are not taking over the universe, I'll tell you that right. So I'd like to just introduce our guest today. The topic for our discussion here is OpenStack and Kubernetes. And so what I'm really trying to do here, guys, is get some clarification, get some helpful understanding really of where we are right now. And so I'd like to just pose some questions here. But first, before we get started, I'd like to see who we have here in the audience. Can you raise your hand if you're a developer here? Okay, great. Operators? Okay. Both? All right, okay, good. All right, and so I encourage you to ask questions if you have any questions about Kubernetes and how it fits with OpenStack. And so why don't I just introduce my guest first of all. So Craig, can you introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Craig. I'm a product guy from Google. I was one of the founders of the Kubernetes project, and I've been working in the computing space at Google for about 6 years.
I'm Mike. I'm VP of Engineering at CoreOS, and for those who don't know CoreOS, we are one of big contributors to Kubernetes and also provide enterprise distribution.
I'm Alex Freedland. I'm the CEO, co-founder and CEO of Mirantis. We are the pure play OpenStack vendor. And as of about 9 months ago, we've been actively both contributing and working with Kubernetes.
Great.
I'm Chad Arimura, co-founder and CEO of Iron.io. We're the creators of Iron Worker. Been operating an event-driven job processing service in the public cloud for the past 5 years. And most recently, we've had extreme inbound interest on licensing a serverless platform for the OpenStack community and the OpenStack platform. So we're pretty excited for everything going on here.
Great. So I'd like to take us back to 2014 at OpenStack Paris, actually. And we actually had a small event there, and we discussed the role of containers in OpenStack. At that time, it was a very nascent, the projects were very nascent, but you could already see the momentum, okay? And now we're seeing OpenStack, and not just containers, but Kubernetes, right? And the role of Kubernetes in OpenStack, with OpenStack, underneath OpenStack, on top of OpenStack. And so there's a lot of questions about actually what is the relationship there? What is that? Is it OpenStack on top of Kubernetes? Or is Kubernetes underneath? Or is it both? Can you guys help us clarify this? Alex, you want to get started?
Well, just make sure I stop on time because I can talk about it all day. But yes,
Yes.
3 years ago, and even 2 years and a year ago, the conversations were around, well, first of all, will container wave be threatening wave to OpenStack? That's number one. And then containers were viewed as workload portability vehicles. And all of this is true. But what became obvious in the last year and what we're seeing as a new trend that I personally believe will be a game changer both for the industry, OpenStack included, for all of infrastructure industry, is that people have realized that a combination of a standard for the container itself, which is Docker, and that was obvious for a while, and the container orchestration, which there's still competition, but we can see Kubernetes having the largest community momentum of everybody, so people are starting to standardize on Kubernetes more than on other things, but the combination of Docker plus Kubernetes creates unification of the logistics and supply chain of delivery of infrastructure innovation.
The logistics and delivery
of infrastructure innovation.
Infrastructure innovation.
That every bit in infrastructure now Dockerized, and how you deliver it over its life cycle can be done through orchestration. So Kubernetes is that. So when you do it, when you look at it from that perspective, you understand that no matter what it is that you're delivering, whether it's OpenStack or Kubernetes itself, if you choose to do that, or any other app in the infrastructure, it can be done in a similar way. So that unification is a game changer. And OpenStack happens to be an application that could be delivered, whose life cycle could be delivered through the same thing. And that, I think, is the massive change that is happening, as a result of Docker and Kubernetes revolution, and OpenStack majorly benefits from that. And we can talk about what those benefits are. But I believe this is the game-changing thing that's happening, as opposed to what people were talking a year and two ago, where it was just a workload story.
Craig, is there anything you would add to that? And I have another question as well.
Yeah, I think we're definitely heading in a direction where the world benefits from a uniform framework for provisioning, deploying, and controlling the life cycle of any unit of compute. And you could look at a lot of OpenStack as being, can be broken up into units of compute that need to be deployed and orchestrated. In terms of the sort of over/under, is it Kubernetes on OpenStack? Is it OpenStack on Kubernetes? I think it really depends on what you want to accomplish. And it has curious parallels to what we actually did inside Google. When I built our first compute product, it was called Google Compute Engine. And it's actually built on top of Borg, which is effectively our internal version of Kubernetes. So we have that. We are running effectively something that looks like OpenStack on something that looks like Kubernetes. And then curiously, we actually also go the other way around. We have effectively this product which is called Google Containerization, which is a hosted version of Kubernetes, and then it's running on our basic compute infrastructure. So we actually do containers and VMs and containers, which is a little bit strange, but sort of bear with me for a moment. The answer is here really, it depends on what you want to accomplish. Like both are perfectly legitimate, both add a lot of value, and over time, I think we're going to see the boundaries blurring quite significantly. By putting Kubernetes on top of OpenStack, you have a very simple and low friction way to get containers into your OpenStack environment. It doesn't require significant disruption. It doesn't require you to rethink the way that you're managing your OpenStack, but you can just turn on container-based workloads, and you can get a lot of the benefits of just driving developer productivity. You're able to take a container and get it mapped into your physical infrastructure very quickly and easily. So that's a great place to start. And that's where almost every customer I've spoken to who's embarked on this journey with us started. They started by putting Kubernetes on top of OpenStack. And they got to like it, and they got to like it a lot. And they then started asking the question, well, this thing's working really well for my applications. Could it do the same thing for my basic infrastructure services? And the answer is, yes, it can. If you actually Dockerize those discrete services, you can just mix them in with the application workload, and you get the same utility, the same value, the same ability to actually manage, update, version those core infrastructure services as you would any other part of the application fabric. So I think both are lovely. I think it's very natural to start if you're new to the containers world to go through the dating process before you try to get married to the container technologies. Start with deploying Kubernetes on top of your OpenStack, but be open-minded. Like as you learn this technology and as you get a feel for how it actually changes the game, consider being more progressive about how you manage your infrastructure.
So Mike, you consider OpenStack a control plane, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Would you consider Kubernetes a control plane?
Yeah, they're two different control planes. But
Okay. So we have two control planes operating in the same environment. Is that unusual?
It is and it isn't, right? Kind of if you look at what, for example, AWS done, right? They also have container engine now, right? And the same as to Google, right? They're both the engine for launching your virtual machines, which has its own control plane, container engine, and there is more and more synergy between them, right? On the cloud providers, and I think for OpenStack and Kubernetes, it will be similar marriage going forward, right? Where you can have unified view of a control plane for both containers and virtual machines, and certain things will start overlapping, like let's say networking, right? And there are some interesting challenges, and I'm sure there'll be interesting solutions around them. But from the other side, there are very distinctive things between virtual machines and containers. And on the other side, kind of Kubernetes is not truly infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. I hope you agree. And it doesn't, for example, provide things like block storage out of the box, right? Versus OpenStack does. So, and storage is one of the big questions for a lot of people who start using Kubernetes in production. So I think there is a lot of natural fit there. And having two control planes is not necessarily a bad thing because they do two very different things, have two very different purposes.
So, Chad, your guys' point of view, you guys are one of the first really to pioneer kind of the concepts of serverless architectures, right? And Kubernetes is really, really nascent still, right? And actually, serverless architectures have been around for a while. We've seen it in all different kinds of forms. Mobile backend as a service, backend as a service. It has had different names over time. So where does this serverless story kind of fit into this equation that we're hearing about today with this OpenStack, Kubernetes, two different control planes, multiple environments, but still there's this possibility of unifying them. Right. Where does serverless architectures fit into place? Because we're seeing a real movement behind that now.
It's interesting. We were actually very inspired by the early versions of Google App Engine, which is where one of the really early kind of serverless architectures, because they give you a framework and you deploy software and it just scales automatically. And you don't have to think about any of the underlying infrastructure. You're not thinking about virtual machines. You're not thinking about servers. You're not even really thinking about containers at that point. You're just using a framework that automatically scales your software across as much infrastructure as you need. And that's the concept of serverless computing or event-driven computing. It's that you don't have to think about the underlying infrastructure. And we're also seeing that enterprises are going through this same journey where it's a very natural abstraction layer. First you abstract out the infrastructure, so you've got compute, storage, and networking with OpenStack, and then you layer on a container orchestration platform on top of that. Kubernetes has been a very natural choice for that recently. We started 5 years ago at the beginning, or at sort of the end of the journey we started 5 years ago with saying, let's not worry about any of that stuff, because as a developer, you don't really care. You just want to write and shift software, and you want it to scale. Now, obviously, there's a big gap in between what you want and what you have today. So that was our journey as a company, as helping developers get there. And so what we're watching now is that it's been a very natural evolution from infrastructure to container orchestration, and now we're starting to see serverless solutions around event-driven computing and microservices and containers.
Okay, so I have some printed pancakes here. If anyone has a question, you get a printed pancake. Who has a question? Come on. I need to hand out these pancakes to someone. Okay, great. All right, Eric, thank you.
A question to all of you. Is there a concern that in Kubernetes we've got a lot of us in the room?
All of us in the room, we get it because we're kind of in the system. We're in the ecosystem. There's this huge enterprise group that's still, straddling virtualization and physical servers. The way that Mirantis has become the OpenStack company, is there a missing piece where we're going to need a Kubernetes company to help coach those really big mid-market customer bases in order to get them to adopt this ecosystem without, fear, the way that OpenStack kind of had that slow burn in those first 6 years, and still is slow burning, as we've seen?
I can answer that. Yes.
Short and succinct.
And that's the short answer. The longer answer is, look, these folks on stage are working hard to become exactly that. CoreOS has been a great partner to Google since the very beginning. I spent a bunch of time with Paul V back in the day, and we've been using a lot of their technologies, and they're very strongly positioned to become one of those companies. Recently, the Mirantis team has become extremely active in the Kubernetes world. They've been tremendously helpful in terms of actually engaging and engaging directly with the project. They've put a lot of engineering resource into it, and they're just doing good hard work, with the community, which is one of the obvious starting points. I think just sort of stepping back, one of the biggest problems we faced is this tragedy of the commons, where a lot of people want to engage with the technology, but they don't necessarily want to put a lot of resource into it. And so, when you look at the ecosystem, I can say unequivocally, CoreOS, Mirantis, and then, even in the early days, Red Hat, put a tremendous amount of time and resource into this project. So, yes, I think that we do need ecosystem companies that will engage enterprises where they are, help them get over the cognitive sort of divide. And I mean, that was always our hope as Google, as we introduced this technology, is we don't have the muscle, we don't have the ability to go to an enterprise and help them deploy Kubernetes onto their existing infrastructure, rationalize it with their OpenStack investments. And that's why we're so invested in strong partnerships as we have had with the folks that are sitting up here. And then Intel's as invested in this vision as we are, and they're putting a tremendous amount of time and resource into it. So I'd say, yeah, absolutely, we have to see this ecosystem strengthen and emerge, and we'd like to see many Kubernetes companies emerge, as we've seen many Linux sort of distributions emerge. Each of them having a special, unique sort of positioning and a set of strengths around the services and support characteristics they have. But yeah, it's a critical part of the ecosystem.
So maybe I can add a dimension to this. I think the problem that large enterprises are facing, and we deal with that every day, is figuring out how to essentially go with digital transformation. And they have technology challenges, and they have headcount and talent gap challenges, and process challenges, right? And whether it's Kubernetes or cloud storage or public cloud or OpenStack, these are the challenges that they have to still traverse, right? So what happens is, for those who are invested enough, you have to have a way to engage with them to help address all of these parameters, right? So it's really a people, process, and technology combination of all three. And another complex piece is that the people who are working with infrastructure and people who are owning the workloads are not necessarily the same people, so you have to straddle the business case for both. And unless all of those are taken care, it doesn't matter what it is. And that brings me to my first point, that ultimately enterprises need to be able to deal with infrastructure innovation that happens over time. And 3 years ago, the talk of town was OpenStack. Today, the talk of town is Kubernetes. 3 years from now, it's going to be God knows what, right? So it's really not about technology anymore. It's about managing change in a predictable way. And that's why the whole lifecycle management of container, and orchestration that says technologically you can have one pipeline through which you challenge, and the rest of it is people and process and a delivery model. That's what these guys want. And that is the way you have to engage, right? So technology is very important.
From Mirantis' point of view, you're just following the market. So I'm curious how that speaks to your commitment to Kubernetes then.
We believe that Kubernetes is
or OpenStack for that matter.
Well, both. So OpenStack solves a certain very important problem that's in here to stay, right? Boris sometimes jokingly calls it a PaaS for VMs, right? And that will be necessary for years and years and years. Plus, Ceph, for example, we think of it as part of OpenStack. Even though technically it isn't, right? So there is storage and there is network. All these problems on infrastructure will be there for years to stay. We are probably one of the most credible companies in the space and will remain so. Kubernetes to us is the delivery of lifecycle management. So this is the change management over time, and we have to become credible in that. As credible as we're on OpenStack, and we're becoming that very quickly. And then there'll be other pieces of innovation that will keep coming over time. But it's the delivery model that will scale and create value. Just like Amazon.com, I mean, remember in the late 90s, there was Amazon.com, Toys.com, Pets.com. Amazon was a book company, Toys.com was a toys company, and Pets.com was a pet food company. And they were all worth $10 billion in 1998.
All right, we could think about the analogies there to today.
Yeah, but Amazon stayed on because they pioneered the delivery model of what it takes to deliver innovation through a .com channel.
Right.
That's what customers want. And whether it's books or toys or whatever, that's really not that important.
Great. I know there were some other questions.
Can I also comment on your question? So I think there is a big difference between OpenStack and Kubernetes. And this big difference is that Docker popularized containers among developers very strongly, right? Yep. I don't think there are too many developers coming and begging their managers to install OpenStack or any other virtualization software, right, to be fair. Versus developers are in love with containers, and at some point they want to push them to various environments. And then when IT is kind of forced to start looking at the solutions, because while a Docker development environment is awesome, I would argue that the deployment to production environment is much less awesome, right? And that's led to a lot to adoption of kind of forced adoption of Kubernetes. And I think both CoreOS, Mirantis, there's a Pranda on East Coast, right? We have a lot of inbound interest where companies come and ask us can you explain to us how we use Kubernetes? And the same, to be fair, happens with Mesos and Mesosphere, right? Because people are craving for a solution for their container problem, so to speak, right?
So a couple of things to riff on. Sorry, Jeff Borek. I work for IBM and Open Technologies. And first, I've heard a lot about Kubernetes and OpenStack and the other projects, but there's a couple of working groups in the Linux Foundation, the CNCF, and the OCI around the container format. What should the audience know about those working groups, and do they need to participate, or is that just going to happen automatically in the back? And then if that's not enough, serverless and PaaS when worlds collide, or is that just the same thing?
I'll wait till I take that first part, and then we'll go to
I can cover OCI.
I think I read a great quote the other day from Adrian Cockcroft, and he said, if you can spin up your containers in 20 milliseconds and have them go away and execute your code, then you've got a server. You can call it serverless. Your PaaS is serverless. If your PaaS can fire up in 20 milliseconds containers. So I think they really are two sides of the same coin. Serverless really is, the concept of serverless, first and foremost, is not that there aren't any servers, is that you're not thinking about them when you're developing software. So I always have to preface that. And then it combines things like event-driven computing, microservices architecture, container technologies. And I think from that standpoint, you really are thinking about PaaS 2.0 or the next generation of PaaS, in the sense that an application is not just a long-running process. It's a long-running process, but it's also a lot of short-running processes around batch processing, job processing, synchronous and asynchronous. And now we've got serverless APIs with functions behind microservices, and it's sort of mind-blowing or boggling. But at the end of the day, that was the promise of PaaS. Platform as a service is all about shipping software and not having to think about any of the underlying components. So I think that's the evolution, and that's the reason that serverless, even baffling me, having sort of pioneered the term for the past 5 years, our company, it's baffling to see this term really take off, but I think that's the evolution of how we think about building software.
All right, OCI, CNCF, Craig?
Sure, I'll do the CNCF part, and then Mike can do the OCI part.
Okay, great.
So, just stepping back, it's absolutely critical that you all become interested and participate in this, right? One of the things, so just for context, I was working on Kubernetes since day one, was sort of, grew it up, and we got to a point in the life cycle, and it was actually Alex Polvey from CoreOS who came to us, and he's like, hey man, you have to give it to a foundation. And we were like, why? It's going great. And it was like, no, it's really important for the brand, it's really important for the community, that this project not be a Google project, that it be a community-owned project. And to be fair, only half of the Kubernetes code base is actually developed by Google. The other half is developed by Red Hat and CoreOS and the Mirantis folks and the rest of the community. So it really is something that we don't own. We had to take it somewhere. And we looked at, I looked at a lot of options, and I was sort of really excited to take it to a foundation. And I wanted to take it to a foundation that had, three characteristics, three important characteristics. The first was that it would be a fair foundation, so that, it wouldn't just be the big, rich vendors, sort of driving the technology, that would have good ways for, everybody in the ecosystem to participate. The second thing is we wanted it to be a foundation that would have a strong sense of technical identity. So, so often when you get these foundations that are largely vendor-driven, it's very difficult to establish what true north is for any given project or any given sort of set of technologies in the environment. And so we wanted to create a foundation that was, that had the ability to maintain technical identity, that had a technical oversight committee that was decoupled from the vendors, that was highly empowered, that could act as a Supreme Court to deal with, sort of differing opinions around which technology we should go. But most importantly, and this is what I'd like to reach out to everyone here, is we wanted to create a foundation that had legitimate accountability to the end users, where the foundation wouldn't be driven by the vendors, where we could create this dynamic balance between the vendors who are largely self-invested and want to, create a great business. And obviously to do that, they have to serve their customers. But more importantly, that would have a very strong end user component in it, where the end users were as empowered as any vendor that's putting down $500,000 to join the foundation, and would, be able to participate at the same level without actually having to put $500,000 down on the table, right? And so we stood up CNCF as a way to engage the community and create a foundation that had some really clean governance and some nice properties. And we're actively building it out. And this is the home where, we want to pull technologies like Kubernetes, we want to pull technologies like etcd from CoreOS, Prometheus. There's a bunch of other sort of technologies that are germane to this cloud-native world. And we also see it as a very natural platform to rationalize with the vibrant and strong OpenStack community. So this is a way to pull these things together. And so I'd say, it behooves everyone who is ultimately going to consume these technologies to engage with us in these foundations and get a seat at the table. Get access to the 1,000 nodes of Intel resource that Intel's kindly gifted to this foundation. Get access at the highest levels to actually set the strategy and tell us what you need, what these technologies need to do to serve you, and counterbalance the natural vendor tensions that exist in these ecosystems. So please engage in CNCF.
Mike?
Yeah, and so just to add to
when's 1.0 coming out?
OCI?
Yeah.
It's for the image format, it's technically out, right? Almost out. But so if we say CNCF, just to add, for companies like CoreOS, I think it's a very important vehicle because it makes us bigger than we are, right? With contribution, the whole motto of open source software, with foundation of Google, Red Hat, Mirantis, other companies chipping in. And then for us, donating standards like CNI to CNCF also opens kind of a lot of possibilities, which otherwise kind of, right, for a lot of enterprises, trusting a 70-people company is much harder than trusting a public foundation. So on OCI, right, so 1.0 is so there are two parts of OCI. So it's Open Container Initiative, which was actually started by Docker. Right. Ironically enough, for those who track the recent exchanges on Twitter between Kelsey from Google and Solomon. But it was started by Docker, who recognized, right, having a standard around the container technology will expand the technology a lot by allowing other vendors to kind of provide various support and tooling around it. There are two parts of standard. One is image format, right, which is kind of Docker image. The other one is runtime. So image format for 1.0, they've been voted. It's finalized. The final vote has been going for like 2 months now, I think. So for practical purposes, it's pretty much standardized, and Docker actually announced support for it, right? So CoreOS has a Rocket container. We are providing support. Microsoft provides Hyper-V/Docker support. So for practical purposes, I would say image format is finalized. The runtime
Runtime's a question mark.
Is a question mark, right? And so also kind of similar, please get engaged, please help us. So it's the OCI right now is Google, Red Hat, CoreOS, Docker. So please engage, please kind of push Docker in the right, Docker folks in the right direction. The standard is based on them, entirely on them, right? On their vision of the containers. But similar to PDF, I would argue, in many other formats, right? Once the company, Adobe was entirely behind PDF, once the company puts it in the public market, the whole kind of infrastructure and tooling support usually explodes because it opens ability for many, many vendors, commercial, open source, to start providing tooling around it.
You know, I'm remiss here. I'm joined here by Joab Jackson, our managing editor, who's also becoming our Pancake Bot manager as well. But Joab has been following this space very closely over the past several months, and I think, Joab, I'm curious from your perspective, the kind of the questions that are coming up in your head about, you know, where we are with this community and how OpenStack and Kubernetes kind of fits in that in terms of developer.
Well, what I'm curious about, or actually a question that the Pancake Bot had, because it is sentient and wanted to know this. This all the Kubernetes OpenStack thing sounds great for the admin, but what's in it for the developer? And is there anything that this combo can offer that serverless can't offer?
Yeah, I mean, I can probably field that. I think of this as a continuum, and I've always thought of computing as a continuum. And I've been privileged to be able to kind of work at both ends of the continuum. So, you know, when I joined Google, all we had was App Engine, right? And it was a powerful next generation letter from the future to enterprise. Like, this is where the world's going, right? And, you know, by and large, no one cared. Like, some people did care.
Yeah.
You know, for some people, it made a huge difference, right? Like, if you were Snapchat, having something where you could just write a bit of code and go internet scale was amazing, right? And we had a lot of like really, really passionate customers who did that. But by and large, enterprise didn't care because it couldn't do everything. It could do a lot of things incredibly well, like really, really well, like amazing developer experience to a point, and then you'd hit what we'd consider this experiential cliff. You'd get to this cliff where it's like, I just want Elasticsearch. I know this all stuff is great, but I just want that thing. How do I get it? And it's like, sorry, you can't. Like, you could run it on Amazon and try to figure out how to like integrate these things together, but you have that experiential cliff, right? And so, you know, when I joined Google, my sort of first order of business was, hey, we need like traditional VMs because like there's a huge ecosystem out there. There's a huge software ecosystem of providers that are building software that's essential to the enterprise. And you know what? It doesn't run in serverless. It runs in VMs. It needs storage. You need to attach it to networking. It has a lot of, you know, proprietary things. Try put a MySQL database in a serverless, you know, activated container. It just doesn't fit, right? So, so the answer is you have this continuum of needs, and you have an incredibly strong and entrenched software vendor ecosystem that's building software that today doesn't fit in the serverless model. And turns out your developers probably need that because you're probably not going to want to write your own database or, you know, whatever the other technology is. It's just, you know, only a few % of the code that's actually run in any production environment is written by you. The rest of it is all the libraries you import and all of the other sort of dependencies you have in your system and all the storage assets that you use. And so you have to kind of meet people at both ends of this. You have to be able to take a developer, meet them where they are, and then offer them a neat way to actually do something that's supplemental, that's cleanly integrated into the rest of their ecosystem. Right. And so that's in many ways why we built Kubernetes, because we saw this big gap that existed. We had beautiful serverless at one end of the spectrum. We had really high quality basic infrastructure at the other end of the spectrum. And then this cognitive gap in between is like, how do you actually distill out the very best parts of, you know, PaaS or serverless, make it generally accessible, and then, you know, help the vendors that are sitting here kind of move up the continuum and actually start to deliver into this new world.
We only have about a minute or two, so I want to briefly be able to get just a quick remark from each one of you guys. So, Alex?
I think I agree with Craig. The world of infrastructure, you know, developer, you know, PaaS is becoming one continuous world, and the containerization is what's making it possible technologically, because, you know, and everything is becoming code. Infrastructure is code, workloads are code, everything is a workload. And then that means that you cater to developers by creating, you know, an ability to develop a workload and then manage the workload in a standard way. But it goes all the way from the programs that you write, all the way down to infrastructure and servers. All of that is going to become one.
I mean, developers are very practical, right, usually. And that's one aspect of it. The other one, they want their code in production. as soon as possible, right? That's why they became developers. And so I think both OpenStack and Kubernetes give them different aspects to meet it's a great balance between practicality when you need VMs and you need storage solutions for things like MySQL exist in relational databases, and ability to quickly write a microservice and push it to production, right? Without sending too many emails, begging somebody in IT to do something.
Chad?
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect way to think about it is it's a continuum of workloads. A cloud is only as valuable as the workloads that run on top of it. If you're not using it, what's the value in even having it? And you have to give developers options for all the different types of workloads they want to create. So you want to deploy a database, there should be an easy way to containerize it and deploy it into a private cloud. I think serverless and functions as a service and Lambda models are a new type of workload that's very interesting because we can write and ship micro pieces of code, but it's just another type of workload that enables you to sort of get access to your private cloud infrastructure that you're creating today. So it's exciting to watch all these things come together now into something valuable for developers.
Great. Well, I want to thank you guys all for being here today, participating in this panel. I want to thank everyone for being here for the Pancake Breakfast. Give a big round of applause. You guys did a great job. And in conclusion, I just want to thank Intel for sponsoring these Pancake Breakfasts, making it possible for us to bring Pancake Robot around the world. So thanks, Intel. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you.